Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. Welcome to our inaugural Sukkot Yom Ayun. We've done Rosh Hashanah. We've done every holiday, but this is the first time we're doing one on Sukkot. So hopefully we're in for a wonderful day of learning, and it's a pleasure to have the day kicked off by Rabbi Dr. Arba Zivotofsky. I haven't done for a while. We told our speakers we don't really do introductions on these days, but a professor of neuroscience at Bar-Ilan University and halachic explorer, and of course writes the in Jewish Action, debunking all the myths of Judaism. And so a pleasure to have him. His talk is being sponsored by Debbie Sondheim. I don't know if I see you, Debbie, but in memory of her mother's yahrzeit is today, Ida Sondheim. Her father's yahrzeit was on Friday, and today's her mother's yahrzeit. She's the neshama should have an aliyah, Brindle Bat Uri, and we should have good memories and long life, and we should have many happy occasions, all of us, to join together. Okay, Ravari, Bakasha, the global reach of the Arba Minim.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure exactly what to call this or how to name it, but as I started researching the Arba Minim in different parts of the world, I found it, I think, and I hope you'll agree, all kinds of fascinating material about the Arba Minim in different parts of the world. For better or for worse, I found way too many interesting things, and therefore I'm going to do what really should be you should never do when having a PowerPoint, and that's to skip slides in the middle. But we're going to have to skip some of them. I'm going to try to explain those that we talk about so everybody understands it, and then we're going to skip some of them because there are lots of really exciting stuff that I found. So everybody's familiar with the Arba Minim. We call Lulav, Esrog, Arava, and Hadassim. They appear only one place in the Chumash. This pasuk in Vayikra in Leviticus 23. L'kachtem lechem b'yom harishon, and then it lists four things: Pri Eitz Hadar, Kapot Tmarim, Anaf Eitz Avot, V'arvei Nachal. I'm not going to translate them because two of them are easily identifiable from the pasuk. Kapot Tmarim we can translate. It's the branches from a tamar tree, from a what's a tamar?
Date.
Tree, yes. And Arvei Nachal is from willows from a river. The other two are much harder to identify: Pri Eitz Hadar and Anaf Eitz Avot. The Rambam, in his introduction to the Mishnah, tells us that we know about what these are through tradition. We're going to skip that today because I want to get to the global reach of the Arba Minim. First, of course, before we head too far out to global reach, is here in Israel. I think it's fantastic when people go visit the ancient synagogues in the Galil, the Golan, Yericho, where you have these mosaics from 1400 years ago, and here you could see the Arba Minim and lots of other things. And just it's important to point out for those who like to call us here in Israel colonizers, we have shuls here going back 1400 years, which everybody can go see. And the Rambam explains in Moreh Nevuchim, why did the Torah pick these four species specifically? And the Rambam says it's because these species are found in the land of Israel and easily accessible, and therefore they're inexpensive. Alas, Jews have scattered to the four corners of the globe, where the Arba Minim were not always so easily available. Here's just again a coin from the Bar Kokhba rebellion. We see the date palm. We're going to start with some lulav stories. Lulav comes from palm trees, and there are actually 2,600 species of palms. Not all of them are kosher for the lulav. In Israel, about 45% come from the Jordan Valley, about 35% from the Arava, and about 20% from Emek HaMa'ayanot. And nowadays, it's different trees that are used for dates and lulavim. So just some examples. There's something called the Washingtonian palm. According to most people, lulav from this type of palm would not be kosher. They're also known as the California fan palm or the Mexican fan palm, and you'll see them all over California and Mexico. Not kosher for lulav. Here's a clip of one of those. And this is the street right behind my house, lined with these Washingtonia palm trees, not kosher for the mitzvah. Here we have coconut palms. Everybody's familiar with these. These are also palm trees, but not kosher for the mitzvah. On the other hand, this is not far from Yericho. This is a huge field of date palms. These would be kosher for the mitzvah of lulav. And here is a picture I took years ago in Yericho, which is known as the Ir HaTmarim, the city of palms. And you can see these are date palms that would be kosher for the mitzvah. So now we're going to start our trek around the world. The first place we're going to stop is in the Canary Islands. You can see circled over here. These are islands off the coast of Mexico. And sometime in the 1950s, someone started bringing canary palms to Israel and selling them for lulavim. And a huge debate took place among the rabbis. Are canary date palms kosher for the mitzvah? Now they're slightly different. Canary date palms, same genus, different species, native to the Canary Islands. They're similar but different to the usual date palm. They grow slower. They date palms are raised, as the name implies, for dates. Canary palms are raised as decorative. You'll see them all over California as decorative. The fruits that they grow are not nearly as edible as those on the date palm. So here you can see on the left a date palm, on the right a canary palm. You'll notice the trunk is different, the leaves are different. The lulavim you can't see from here, but the lulavim are actually different. And a very important difference as far as the rabbis were concerned is the fruit. The date palm has dates that are very popular, that's why they're raised for: large, fleshy, elongated, sweet fruit. The canary palm, small, not sweet, large pit, and nobody raises them for the fruit. And here's just a detailed list of the difference between the lulavim. And the question arose in the 50s. The first one to really address it in detail was the former chief rabbi of Jerusalem, Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank. And his question, the way he approached the question, he said, the Torah doesn't say take a lulav. It says take the branch of a date palm. And his question was, does the tree that you take the lulav from have to grow edible dates? And he said, the canary date palm, they're not really edible. He said, so he was asked about it, he said, the trees that are called the kalim, canarim, Eino Magadel Tamarim. They don't really grow dates. Shekamat Eino Roy Lachila. They're almost not edible. And therefore, maybe they wouldn't be called Kapot Tamarim, which is the biblical language for lulav. And he goes on and he discusses, and he says, it's clear the Torah wasn't insistent that it be a tree that actually grows dates, because date palm trees have male and female trees, and only the female grows dates. So he says, first of all, kapotu lav the kapid krosh yegdelim bilan zetarim. It's not that on this tree you have to grow dates. It has to be a species that grows dates. And he goes on and he discusses it in great detail. And he thinks that the Torah didn't care about the fact that it grows dates, and therefore he thinks that the canary palm should be acceptable for the mitzvah of lulav. Across the ocean was Moshe Feinstein. And this is Moshe sitting there. This is me in high school when my Rabbi took us there to visit Rav Moshe. And Rav Moshe Feinstein was adamant in his opinion about the canary palm. He said, according to my humble opinion, pashut ubaror she'en zeh mimine lulav klal. This is not at all related to a lulav. And he goes on at the end, he says, af b'diavad k'she'en lulav acher, even if you have no other lulav, ein yotzim b'yedei mitzvah, you don't fulfill your obligation with a lulav from a canary, v'hu bracha levatala, it would be a improper blessing, v'hu barur upashut. He said it's so clear and obvious, ad she'en ledun b'zeh, you don't even have to discuss this. Ve'elu shenot osam b'Eretz, those who planted them in Israel are misleading the public, and they're even misled some of the leading rabbinic scholars, because it's obvious, he says, this is not a lulav. So that was Moshe Feinstein. Back in Israel, one of the leaders today of the religious Zionists is Rav Yaakov Ariel. He had been chief rabbi of Ramat Gan for many, many decades. He said the exact opposite. He says, Nirlani is daiti, shedin hadekel canary, the canary palm, kedin atamar l'chol dover, it's exactly like a date palm. Ha'havdalim ketanim, the differences between these trees are so small. V'rak hamumchim yodel havchim b'neim, only an expert would even notice these are two different types of trees. And therefore he thinks they're okay. And to summarize, the Tzitz Eliezer of Waldenberg, one of the leading authorities in the late 20th century, Avad Yossi, the former chief rabbi, both say that the canary palm is acceptable for the mitzvah. And of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach summarized it and says, Halula v'kanari nera shareu b'chlal kapot marim. He says, it seems to me that this is a date palm, and therefore you could use it. And he again repeats this line that only experts could tell them apart. So we have from one extreme to the other, we have these palm trees that are native to the Canary Islands. We have in the land of Israel some of the leading authorities like Tzitz Eliezer, Avad Yosef, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach say it's acceptable. We have, on the other hand, we have Moshe Feinstein, who was adamant that they're not acceptable. Now, most of you, I assume, on this Zoom remember these kind of headlines. They're not so long ago. In the land of the palm, Israelis face lulav shortage. Israel asks Egypt to increase the number of lulavs. Lulav imports from Egypt in danger. And every year, here in Israel, we would import hundreds of thousands of lulavim from El Arish, from Egypt. And every year, Egypt would threaten to cut it, or Egypt would limit it, and this went on for years. I don't know if any of you have paid attention, but in the last few years, zero headlines like this. We no longer import from Egypt. We no longer import from El Arish. We no longer are under any threats from Egypt to limit it. What happened? Israeli technology, startup nation. Previously, you can harvest a lulav and store it in a green, moist condition for only about 45 days. But lulavim are not a fruit. It's a branch that's growing, and they're growing all year long. But what this meant is you could only harvest them right before Sukkot. Volcani, which is the Israeli National Research Organization, funded by the government, has a branch that deals with agriculture and halacha. And two researchers, Dr. Nehemiah Aroni and Dr. David Dudi Koenigsberg, came up with a way to store lulavim for up to 12 months, which means that nowadays, all of the kibbutzim that are growing lulavim start harvesting them before Pesach, and there's today no longer a need for importing. One of the largest growers of lulavim is Tirat Tzvi, kibbutz up north. They have over 13,000 lulav trees. They grow about 150,000 lulavim. And here you could see on the left, one of these lulav experts from Thailand sorting the lulavim. That was a joke. But he sorts them. He's been trained, and they store them now for over half a year. The real expert, of course, is the guy up at the top, and the guy that I'm with on the right. He lives in Tirat Tzvi. He's been working with lulavim for years, and he said it was a game changer. We no longer import lulavim. Okay, here's again another one of those 1,600-year-old shuls. You can see the Arba Minim. This is the shul in Tveria, Chamat Tveria, and that's me visiting there just a few weeks ago. When Rabbi Kelman says you have to make sure to prepare it and best quality, we go out and we get it. Okay, next we're going to move on to Aravot. What's considered a willow of the spring? So two of the leading agricultural halakha experts of the last generation, Professor Felix, who sort of was the father of flora and fauna of the Bible and the Talmud, he thought that any kind of willow that's of the genus Salix is okay for the mitzvah. Professor Kislev, who is still alive in his 90s, he thought that we want a very specific thing. He thought that you want specifically Salix acmofolia. This is the one that Professor Kislev thinks is the ideal. Professor Felix agrees this one is also acceptable, and it makes sense because this one is native to the Middle East and Egypt. So it makes sense that this would be the type that's kosher for the mitzvah. And here we are also in up north, Nachal HaShofet, last month, and just going through the Nachal, they have them growing there. This is another one that's actually quite popular in parts of Europe. Professor Felix thinks this is just fine. Professor Kislev would not be so happy with it. You can see the leaves up close on the right, very similar to the Aravot that most of us use. This is what the tree looks like on the left. Here's a weeping willow. It's also a salix, meaning Professor Felix would think a weeping willow is acceptable as well. You see the leaves on the left there, what the tree looks like on the right. Professor Kislev would not be so happy, particularly since the halacha likes a reddish stem, and these aren't. And it has teeth on the it's the leaves are have ridges, which is not ideal. So now we go to New Zealand.
They're jagged.
The jagged, that's the word. See, here is well, you know that when you make aliyah, you don't become bilingual, you become semilingual. So here is and in the last obviously 100 years, most of the Arba Minim are shipped around the world. Today, it's pretty easy to ship things and they get pretty quickly. The one that has always been the most difficult is Aravot. They dry out the quickest. So here is a letter that I found from the rabbi of the Auckland Hebrew Congregation in 1991. He wrote to Eretz Chemda, which is an organization in Yerushalayim where they train rabbis and dayanim, and he sent a photocopy of the Aravot they have in New Zealand. He put it on a photocopy machine and he sent them this photocopy on the right. And he said, is this acceptable for an Arava? This is what we have in New Zealand, he says. We can't import them from Israel. They just don't get here in time and moist. The rabbis in Eretz Chemda did the obvious thing. They said, thanks for the photocopy. Could you please send us a real copy or the scientific name of the kind? You must have plant experts, botany experts. Tell us what willow you have. So he responded back and he told them the name, and this is the type of willow that they grow. Now, it's strange because it's actually native to North and South America, not to New Zealand. But this is in 1991 when he said they were their local willow in New Zealand. So they then took it to their experts and they asked the different botany experts, and eventually they wrote back a response signed off by Rav Shaul Yisraeli, who was one of the leading rabbis of the religious Zionists in Israel. Professor Felix thought it was absolutely no problem. And even Professor Kislev said it's not the ideal species, but the species you have in New Zealand is one that you could use for the mitzvah. Okay, how about this? This is from Australia, and it looks awfully like an arava. Most of you, if I showed you the leaves, let's say in the bottom left, you would say this looks like an arava. However, I've told you already it's native to Australia, and it's actually a tree that's native to Australia, but is now very, very popular here in Israel, eucalyptus. And the question is the eucalyptus acceptable for the mitzvah of arava? You might think it's not at all related. It's not a salix, but the leaves look quite similar, and it does grow on bodies of water. Eucalyptus in Israel is a fantastic story. They were first brought here in the 1860s, again, a second shipment in the 1880s. All of us growing up learned that they brought the eucalyptus to drain the swamps and get rid of malaria. And indeed, they were very, very successful to the point where in 1889, Rav Diskin from the Yishuv Hayoshen in Yerushalayim was so convinced that they were cleaning the air. They were really cleaning the swamps, but that was cleaning the air, that he was inclined to permit them to plant eucalyptus in the Shemitah year. Rav Kook was inclined similarly in 1924. So it became a very important plant here in the land of Israel. And there's a fascinating quote in the book about the Arba Minim, one of the main books of Arba Minim, where he quotes secondhand Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, quoting the Maharal Diskin, who had been the chief rabbi of Jerusalem before him, saying that the eucalyptus was acceptable for Arava. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank himself wrote a response about it, and he said absolutely not. He said they are not acceptable for Arava. This debate didn't end. In 1996, Rav Yehuda Amichai, who's the head of or second in an organization called Machon Torah V'Aretz, an organization that deals with agriculture and halacha, said that he thought eucalyptus was acceptable. He wrote a long article on why eucalyptus is acceptable. In the very next issue of the Journal of the Machon Torah V'Aretz, Rav Yehuda Zolden wrote back and he said, you're off your rocker. He said it's absolutely unacceptable. He said there's nothing to talk about. Okay, back to Australia. There's a halacha that's mentioned in the Gemara, mentioned then in the Shulchan Aruch, and we're all familiar with it because when we take the Arba Minim, you start with the esrog upside down, and then you make the bracha, and then you turn it right side up. Why? Because the Gemara said you can't fulfill the obligation of the mitzvah when it's not in the way that it grows, and the esrog grows with the pitum growing away from the ground. Well, this led Rav Yaakov Ettlinger to write a fascinating thought. He said he died in 1871, and he wrote, if you look on the right side, regarding the four Minim in the islands of America and in Australia, where they're on the side of the globe and underneath us on the globe. And we know from what the natural scientists have told us that their feet are opposite our feet. And they only don't fall off because of that God created, he doesn't use the word gravity, created gravity. Does that mean that if we would get any of the Arba Minim from Australia or America here in Israel, or for him in Europe, it would be that we're taking it not the way that it grows? So I thought it was a fascinating thought that he had. It's also interesting the history of the printing. It was printed in 1836, and it actually said only the islands of America. I guess his students realized that doesn't carry the same weight. And in all subsequent editions after 1862, it said America and Australia. And he decided that no, that wouldn't make it invalid. Those Arba Minim would still be valid. Okay, let's head off to Egypt now a little bit. One of the most fascinating characters in the last few hundred years, and character is the only way to describe him, was a man by the name of Yaakov Sapir. He was a shadar, a shliach d'Rabbanan, a emissary of the Jerusalem community in the mid-19th century. He was sent to travel abroad and collect funds for the Jerusalem community. You might have expected him to travel to France, Germany, maybe Eastern Europe in the mid-19th century to collect money. Instead, he went the other direction. He went to India, Egypt, Yemen, Australia, New Zealand. I don't know how much money he came back with, but he wrote a fascinating travelogue called Evan Sapir. And from that, we learn what the Jewish communities were like in all of these places in the mid-19th century. And he wrote, when he describes being in Egypt one sukkah, he says, "V'gam ha'yireim," even those who fear God, ha'osam sukkah b'chatzeram, in their courtyard or al agag, lo yishnu behem. They don't sleep in their sukkah. Why? Ki yarim haruach. They're worried about the winds. V'hazvuvim ha'oktzim, the flies that sting. And then he goes on, he says that he couldn't bear not to sleep in the sukkah. He slept in the sukkah. And then he says that if you skip down a few lines, Kamti, I don't know if you see my mouse. Kamti baboker, v'kol b'sarai, maseh machat chadudim chadudim. My whole skin, when I got up in the morning, was like he had been stung by many mizvuvei Mitzrayim, from all the different flies of Egypt. Uben laila hayiti had yoked, and overnight I became like a simpleton, meaning I shouldn't have slept in the sukkah. Avakol yomim sheshaftu Mitzrayim hayiti had yoked. I did it every night. And then to our subject, he says, Etrogim v'lulavim hadas v'arava yesh lahem dai be'eretz hazot. They have lots and lots of all four species, and that makes sense. Just like they're native to the land of Israel, they grow in Egypt. And then anybody ends, Atrogim ein lehem pitma. The Astrogim don't have a pitum. Uma'atim hema, and they don't have a lot of the Astrogim. V'shara minim l'rov. And the others, they have lots of them here in Egypt. When I was in Egypt many years ago, we visited the Ben Ezra Shul, and you could see off on the right corner over here in the backyard an Arava tree. This tree is massive. And when we described it, some Arava experts, they told us that it's possible that this tree is 1,000 years old or older, which would mean that it's from this tree that the Rambam himself could have very possibly gotten his Aravas. Okay, let's do a little about Esrog. We'll skip that. We'll start with the great West Indies Etrog controversy. In 1847, it tore apart, well, I can't even say the rabbinic world, the very, very small rabbinic world of North America. In the mid-1800s, there was a Torah journal called The Occident. It was a monthly, and that's where most of the Torah discussion took place in America in the mid-19th century. And you'll see it's a monthly. We're starting here with the issue from May 1847. Rabbi Abraham Rice, the first ordained rabbi in the U.S., wrote in May 1847 his opinion of the West India Esrogim. And he says he has no problem. He thinks that they're acceptable. Again, this is May. June 1847, another rabbi wrote back. As long as he's going to prohibit them, he wrote his letter in Hebrew. And he said, no way, the West India esrogim are all morkav, are all grafted, and grafted esrogim are not acceptable. This is June. July 1847, we get a further letter where Rabbi Rice responds, and he says that he thinks they're acceptable. And this is the bottom of the page. Whoa, uh-oh. This is the bottom of the page. Up here is the top of the page, again, July 1847. At the bottom of the page, July 1847. The editor, Isaac Leeser, wrote, he says, I've had enough. We've had these letters back and forth about the West India Esrogim. And he says that we've received another letter from Mr. Isaac Levy of Cincinnati, who contends that having examined during 7 years more than 500 esrogim, he had found on all of them the signs of grafted fruit, and therefore this Mr. Levy of Cincinnati wants to prohibit them. Isaac Lisa says, we do not profess to be able to decide the question where so many doctors disagree, but so far as our private judgment goes, and if we are correctly informed, we must say West Indian citrons, esrogim, are grown on original stock, not grafted, and therefore he thinks kosher. And he says, therefore, I'm taking this discussion offline. No more letters in my journal. In the meantime, it's not a letter in the journal, but there was a letter sent from a rabbi in the West Indies. You can get this all online, by the way. It's fascinating. I was able to get this online. And here you have this letter from Mr. Moses Nathan of St. Thomas, who had been in Kingston, Jamaica. And he says, of Jamaica especially, I can assert most positively that the citron grows in its original state, either where it was first planted or where the wind has scattered the seed, has taken root. They never grafted. And he said there were very Orthodox Jews who had been here in Jamaica, and they wouldn't have let there be grafted fruits, and therefore it's totally kosher. Okay, that was, again, 1847. Big debate going on in the U.S. about West India esrogim. Another character is Rabbi Yosef Schwartz. If you're not familiar with him, it's also worth getting to know him. Rabbi Yosef Schwartz was a European, made Aliyah in the early 1800s, and his goal was to learn flora, fauna, geography, identify all the sites of the Bible. And he wrote a fantastic book about the land of Israel. At some point, the wind seemed to have gotten into his sails and taken him far flung from his mission, and he ended up in the U.S. And he wrote a book of tshuvas, and in there he has a question. He says, Nishalti biosi gola b'medinat America al divrei esrogehem. I was in America, and they asked me about the American esrogim. And he says they're a little different. Emuter agulim, maraim levana, yeroka. They look a little different color and shape. And he says, the question is, could you use them and make a bracha on them? And he says, V'imkein vadek sherimhem lifnei America. For those in the U.S., because these are the U.S. esrogim, they're definitely kosher. V'chein asiti halach lemasa. When I was here, he says, that's what I did. Sheberachta lehem b'chag tishrei taf reish yud v'taf reish yud aleph, meaning 1849, 1850. Be'et ani begola be'eretz ahi. He says, when I was in America, I indeed, for those 2 years, said a bracha on the esrogim from the West Indies. However, he then continues, says, I'm not sure if you could say the bracha on them, meaning if they're acceptable for the mitzvah for people not from the U.S. So that's West Indies. And in New Orleans, they had a sorghum. And of Bernard Illoway, another character, he was a Talmud Chacham, a rabbi from Hungary, had a PhD from Hungary, and then he got involved in politics, not Jewish politics, general politics. And he had to escape Hungary. He came to the U.S., was a rabbi in Baltimore, in New Orleans, in Cincinnati, in Cleveland. He couldn't really hold a job. He was too traditional, but an amazing character. Anyway, his son became a doctor in New York, published his father's letters, and he said in the year 1861, the first year he was in New Orleans, it was impossible owing to all communication with northern cities being cut off because of the Civil War. And they said the esrog that grew indigenously was found to be apostle. Found meaning he, Rabbi Illoway, determined it was apostle. In the emergency, my father decided that they should be used, but without the bracha. Meaning they should take them, but not say a bracha on them. Okay. Esrogim from Calabria. That's in the Boot here in Italy. Fascinating. It's actually the town in the center where they grow. It's called Santa Maria del Cedro, which means Chedro's esrog, Santa Maria of the Esrogim. Now, who would want to get an esrog from Italy? Well, Chabad, those who are really Chabadniks, will only get an esrogim from Italy. Why? And the Rebbe wrote it in a few places. He explained, we have a tradition from my father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, who had a tradition from the previous Rebbe, when God in the desert commanded Moses, go get an esrog. What did Moshe do? Sholchu shluchim be'emtzot ananei kavod. He sent messengers on the clouds of glory, lahavi etrogim beCalabria. And to this day, those are the preferred esrogim for Chabadniks. Okay, I know that Rabbi Kelman is really worried about time here, so we're going to now go really fast. I just came back from buying esrogim, and they were selling Moroccan esrogim an hour ago. There in Ramat Beit Shemesh, Moroccan esrogim. And it's been a big issue for 50 or 70 years in Israel. Books have come out about them. Here are pictures from where they grow them. Nobody is raising them. Nobody's grafting them, but it doesn't matter. They are different than the esrogim that we grow in Israel. They're elongated, they're slender, and they're often seedless. Here is an MRI of a Moroccan esrog. This is a regular esrog, Moroccan esrog. And you could see this one happened to have one seed, but they're long, slender, and seedless. Here's a cross-section of a Moroccan esrog. Again, no seeds. So here's another one. And their flowers are also different color than the flowers of the esrogim here. We're now going to skip all of the details. Here's, again, this booklet published about it. And the rabbis, therefore, have been debating. The halacha always talks about what's called chadrei zera, the little pockets where the seeds are in the esrog. If you don't have a seed, it doesn't have a seed pocket. Does that mean it's not a halachic esrog? Well, indeed, the Klosenberger Rebbe, very famous as the one who founded Laniado Hospital, famous also a Holocaust survivor who lost his wife and 10 children in the Holocaust. He wrote this letter where he said, as far as he's concerned, no seeds, not an esrog, do not use Moroccan esrog. On the other hand, many others disagreed. Backdorf Ettlinger, he used one in 1857, where he said he used the Moroccan esrog. It was beautiful, and he thought it was great. And there were responses from many of the leading rabbis. We're going to unfortunately skip them for lack of time, who most of them had said they're acceptable. Some of them, for example, where Menashe Klein said that they're not acceptable, but it's been a great debate. We'll see in a minute why I didn't buy it. We'll get to Yemenite esrogim. Here's from Yemen. They're also slightly different. They grow large, often really large. They have no juicy area, like lemons and our esrogim. You'll see in a minute a picture. There are booklets about them as well. Rav Kapach insists that these are the only real esrogim. Here's Rav Mahbud. You can see there's no juice. It doesn't look like a lemon at all. They do have seeds, and they have these seed pockets. Left is a European esrog. When you look at it next to the Yemenite, you say, wait, that looks like a lemon. And that's indeed what Rav Kapach said. He said, our esrogim look like lemons. But this is, you'll open European or Israeli esrogim, this is what they look like. They grow large. You can see here esrogim. Here's my son many years ago with a large Yemenite esrog. Here's Rav Mahbud with a large. Here's in my shul. Every year there's one guy who gets a really big one. We're going to skip all the proofs the Yemenite bring why theirs is the authentic esrog. But again, Evan Sapir, Yaakov Sapir, talks about that he used one of these huge ones in Yemen when he was there. And here's Yemenite, again, compared to a typical. Okay, we'll get back to that in a minute. I'm just skipping all that. We're going to skip Corfu. Corfu, you can give an entire course on the Corfu esrog controversy, which finally ended in 1891 with the Corfu blood libel, when the Jews around the world said, forget it, we're not buying Corfu esrogim. But in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, every rabbi, big and small in Europe, was involved in the Corfu esrog controversy. Why? It centered around grafted esrogim. They used to graft esrogim because the tree is a weak tree, easily susceptible to disease. They would put it on what's called a chush, a sour lemon. And today, overwhelmingly, most esrogim are not grafted because you're not going to sell them. Here's what grafting looks like. You take a base, you cut off the tree and you put it, the esrog tree in this case, on top. Here is what a graft looks like. Okay, these are grafted trees. This is a grafted esrog that we saw when I went with my friend Ari Greenspan, 2006. This is an esrog tree in Italy. I won't tell the Chabadniks, but this is not far from where they get this from. And this is a grafted esrog tree. Huge debate why it's not kosher, is it not kosher? All of that will have to wait someday for shear on grafting. The question is, which is the real esrog? We've seen Yemenite, no juice, lots of seeds. Moroccan, lots of juice, no seeds. The European Israeli, which is the real one? And of course, the answer is they're all. A genetic analysis was done of the esrogim. All the esrogim are esrogim. None of them have any lemon or orange or chush in them. They're all very distinct from all the other citrus, and they're all esrogim. So why do they look so different? Well, the Rambam tells us you can have a species, same species that grows in different places because of the weather, the environment, the soil. They're going to look different. Similarly, Patzorcha Rav Shmuel David Monk, a rabbi in Haifa who died a few years ago, big Talmid Chacham, said it could simply be the environment, the weather makes them grow differently. And he said that about both Yemenite and Moroccan esrogim. We're going to skip to Israeli. I'm not going to read it inside. You got to look up the Aruch HaShulchan. Writing in the late 19th century, said, how dare anybody buy an esrog other than one that grows in the land of Israel? If you have the option, how could you buy anything other than an Israeli grown one? And this is before communication and travel. And so, which is why I turned down some beautiful looking Moroccan grown esrogim just now in the shuk in Beit Shemesh. And this is brief. This is what the Aruch HaShulchan writes in his book, the Aruch HaShulchan. He has a page-and-a-half letter that's reprinted in the Shtei Chemed, where he goes to task on this. Others that's similar. Here is another kind of esrog, the finger esrog, grows in Southeast Asia. Zivchei Tzedek permitted it. His Talmud, the Ben Ish Chai, prohibited it. You're saying, does it really matter? The answer is yes. When the Mir Yeshiva was in Shanghai, that's all they had. And in 2006, I spoke to YU Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Yankelevich. I don't know if you knew him, Jay. And he said he was in Shanghai, and they were told not to use the finger esrog, even without a bracha. It's not an esrog. Okay, we're going to skip this esrog with gartels. It's really cool. There's a great story with Hadassim. We got to do a little bit Amsterdam, Hamburg, and Prague. The what I would call the Hadassim, they were too good to be true. Rav Yaakov Reischer in Prague wrote a response where he said, indeed, they're too good to be true. It must be they're grafted. And Rav Tzvi Ashkenazi, dealing with Amsterdam and Hamburg, but it was more or less the same period and the same kind of question. He said, who are you kidding? These are beautiful. Why would you get those dried out things that we've been imported from Italy? So here's the Shvus Yaakov, where he says, "Vada diyesh chashash shemi min achav." They're so good. It must be that they're grafted. You at least have to worry about that. And therefore, he says he would not use them. And on the other hand, the Chacham Tzvi said, what are you talking about? He says, those that come from Italy, that all come dried out, they're probably grafted. And these local ones are fantastic. Okay, you can't end without mentioning what's going on nowadays. The soldiers also want to use Arba Minim. On the left is from the Kippur War. Right is my son's neighbor in Gaza. My son didn't send me pictures of him with Arba Minim. He was in Lebanon at this time. He did send me pictures of his sukkah, but that's not the topic today. This is his neighbor in Gaza. And it goes way back. This is a letter from Bar Kokhba sent during the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And this was found in the Bar Kokhba caves in Midbar Yehuda, where he writes a letter, Shimon, that's Bar Kokhba, writing to Yehuda, son of Menashe, says, listen, we're out in battle. I'm sending you 2 donkeys. I want you to send them back loaded with the Arba Minim. We want to do the mitzvah of Arba Minim during the war. And this is a tshuva by Harav Udi Schwartz. If you haven't had a chance, he gave a share recently in YU. It's worth listening to him. He's head of the Halacha department of the Army. Unbelievable Talmid Chacham. And the questions that he has been fielding are truly awe-inspiring. I mean, the questions that the soldiers have been sending in from every field of Halacha. So here he was asked, he said, if the army provides Arba Minim, could you use them because they're not yours? And on the first day, it has to be yours. And he brings all the proofs from Europe and history where they only had one set per synagogue. And he says, for sure, the army buys them for the purpose that you acquire it and then give it back. And he says you could certainly use them. And the last thing we have to end with is Jerusalem. So we'll do it really quickly because I know we're out of time. And Rambam says that in all of Jerusalem, which is in the shadow of the Mikdash, all of Jerusalem is considered for the halachas of Arba Minim like the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore, although in the whole rest of the world the Arba Minim are biblical only the first day and rabbinic the rest of the days, in Jerusalem it's biblical on all the days of Sukkot, which means positive and negative. It means negative, not negative, but it means it's a chumrah in that certain things that invalidate, for example, an esrog, don't apply on the rest of the days out of Israel, out of Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, it would still invalidate it. The positive is those of us looking to do mitzvahs. You can go to the old city of Jerusalem, and there are lots of people standing there with Arba Minim to give you an opportunity to shake it. And while some people, like of Sternbach, said, we don't really have to be concerned for this Das Yochid of the Rambam, this minority opinion. Others, like of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, said whenever he would go to the kotel on Chol Hamoed, he would again shake the lulav and esrog. To that way, if the Rambam is correct, he has done another biblical mitzvah. And many of us indeed try to go to the kotel, to the old city, at least once on a Chol Hamoed and shake the Arba Minim again. Here's when we took the kids many years ago. And it's just one more reason why I invite all of you who are still not yet in the land of Israel, one more good reason to come. It gives you another chance to do the biblical mitzvah of the Arba Minim. So, okay, if there are any questions, I don't know if we have any time.
12 seconds for questions, but Rabbi, I want to meet the Lubavitch Shaliach in Columbia who was sent from the Ananei HaKavod. That's
okay.
As you know, Lubavitch, they never leave. They take a job and they never leave. So anyway,
yes.
Yasher Koch, really wonderful. Thank you very much. Always fascinating.
Thank you so much. And
Debbie, I think you walked in late. You came in late, so I just want to again thank you for sponsoring his talk in observance of the yahrzeit of your mother, Ina Sondheim Bradel Bas Uri, and you should have many happy occasions. I know your father's yahrzeit was on Friday, your mother's yahrzeit today, so we should have
thank you.
Many happy occasions. And now,
thank you. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Without further ado, Dr. Rebecca Winter, who always a pleasure to have from Atlanta. You know, we miss her in Toronto, but
hold on, Jay. One quick thing. Some people wanted some of the sources. I really went through it really fast. I know we have to move on. If anybody wants any of the particular sources, I can't send the whole PowerPoint. It's really heavy. But you could write to Torah in Motion, and if you want anything in particular, and I'll send to them and they'll forward.
Yeah, because I don't have them either, so it's not.
No. But anything, if anybody wants, please write to Torah in Motion, and you can give my email or whatever it is. Okay.
Okay, Ari, enjoy the wedding. Mazel tov.
Okay.
Okay. Chag Sameach. Okay.